Silence creates answers that words never could. That is why some of the most powerful moments in a relationship happen after the conversation ends, after the messages stop, and after two people who once meant everything to each other suddenly disappear from each other's lives. Most people believe they already know what happens when an empath and an avoidant go no contact. They assume the empath becomes trapped in sadness, while the avoidant simply moves on without looking back. It sounds simple. It sounds predictable. But the truth is far more complicated, and in many cases, far more surprising. Beneath the surface, a psychological process begins unfolding that neither person fully expects. Emotions that were hidden start rising. Patterns that were invisible become impossible to ignore. And the roles that seemed fixed for so long can begin to shift in ways that leave both people questioning everything they thought they knew about the relationship. The connection between an empath and an avoidant is often one of the most intense dynamics people experience. One person naturally moves toward emotional closeness. The other instinctively moves away when emotions become too overwhelming. One seeks reassurance, the other seeks distance. For months, sometimes years, this cycle repeats itself over and over again. The empath keeps giving, the avoidant keeps pulling back. Both become trapped inside a pattern neither fully understands. Then one day, the pattern breaks. The empath stops reaching out. The avoidant stops hearing from them. The familiar rhythm disappears. No messages arrive. No emotional conversations happen. No one checks in. The silence becomes real, and that is where the story truly begins. What many people do not realize is that no contact affects an empath and an avoidant completely different ways and on completely different timelines. The person who appears strongest at the beginning may struggle later. The person who seems most broken at first may end up healing faster than anyone expected. Hidden emotions emerge. Uncomfortable truths surface. Long-buried fears begin demanding attention. In some cases, the silence creates personal growth. In others, it creates regret. And sometimes, it reveals feelings that neither person was willing to face while the relationship was still active. In this video, you will discover what usually happens during the first days of no contact. Why the empath often experiences emotional withdrawal before clarity arrives. Why the avoidant may initially feel relief before unexpected emotions begin surfacing. And how the entire emotional dynamic can gradually reverse. You will also learn one of the most misunderstood truths about avoidance, the hidden psychological shift that often changes everything, and the crucial factor that determines whether two people eventually reconnect or continue moving apart forever. The final stages of this process are often the most surprising. So make sure you stay with us until the end, because the last insight may completely change the way you see no contact, avoidance, empaths, and the meaning of silence itself. If you enjoy exploring human behavior, attachment psychology, relationship dynamics, and the deeper truths that most people overlook, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the channel, and if you're new here, take a moment to subscribe and join us for more powerful insights into the hidden patterns that shape our relationships and our lives. The first stage of no contact is usually the most painful for the empath. While outsiders often focus on the breakup itself, they do not see is the emotional withdrawal happening beneath the surface. An empath does not simply lose a person. They lose a routine, a connection, a hope, and sometimes even a future they had imagined in their mind. For a long time, much of their emotional energy was directed toward the relationship. They thought about it constantly. They worried about it. They tried to understand it. They invested time trying to make it work. Even during moments when the avoidance seemed distant, the empath was often still, emotionally present. Their mind remained connected even when the relationship felt uncertain. That is why the first days of no contact can feel so overwhelming. The silence arrives suddenly. The usual habits disappear. There are no messages to analyze, no conversations to revisit, no signs to interpret. The empath suddenly finds themselves alone with thoughts that have nowhere to go. Their mind starts searching for answers. They replay old conversations. They examine every disagreement. They revisit moments once ignored. They ask themselves whether they said the wrong thing, whether they should have been more patient, whether they should have tried harder, whether they should reach out one more time. Every memory feels important. Every detail feels significant. The emotional bond that once had an outlet suddenly has nowhere to flow. This is why many empaths describe the first stage of no contact as feeling similar to withdrawal. They became accustomed to giving their attention to another person. Their focus was directed outward for so long that being forced to turn inward feels uncomfortable. The silence creates a gap, and that gap can feel unbearable at first. They check their phone. They wonder what the avoidant is doing. They think about whether they're being missed. They imagine conversations that never happen. Their emotions move up and down throughout the day. One moment they feel strong. The next moment they feel completely overwhelmed. Yet, beneath all this pain, a quiet shift begins taking place. It is a shift that many empaths fail to notice in the beginning because it happens slowly. For the first time in a very long time, their energy is no longer flowing entirely towards someone else. It starts returning to them. At first, this feels strange. An empath is often used to focusing on another person's feelings. They become skilled at understanding emotions, solving problems, and providing support. They know how to care for others. What they sometimes struggle with is caring for themselves with the same level of dedication. No contact forces them into a situation where they must finally face their own emotional world. There is no one left to rescue, no relationship left to fix, no emotional mystery left to solve through constant effort. Slowly, the attention that was once directed outward begins moving inward. They start noticing their own exhaustion. They start recognizing how much energy they spent trying to hold the relationship together. They begin remembering the moments when they ignored their own needs. They start asking questions they never asked before. Why was I always the one reaching out? Why did I accept inconsistency? Why did I keep giving when I felt emotionally drained? These questions do not arrive immediately. They emerge gradually as the emotional storm begins to settle. While the empath is experiencing this intense emotional withdrawal, the avoidant often enters a very different phase. This is where many people become confused, because the avoidance reaction rarely matches what others expect. At first, the avoidant may actually feel relief. After all, the emotional pressure that once existed is suddenly gone. There are no difficult conversations waiting for them, no expectations demanding attention, no emotional intensity requiring a response. The space they often crave finally appears. For a short period, this can feel calming. Their nervous system relaxes, the tension decreases, the relationship no longer feels like an immediate challenge that must be managed. To an outside observer, it may even seem like they are completely unaffected. They continue with daily life. They focus on work. They spend time on personal interests. They appear normal. Sometimes they even appear happier. This is the stage that creates so much misunderstanding. The empath looks at the silence and assumes it proves they never mattered. Friends and family often reinforce this belief. They point to the avoidant's apparent calmness as evidence that they have already moved on. But appearances can be deceptive. Relief is not the same as healing. Relief is not the same as emotional resolution. Relief simply means that immediate pressure has disappeared. The avoidant may feel lighter because the demands of intimacy are no longer present. But that does not mean the emotional bond itself has vanished. In many cases, deeper emotions remain hidden beneath the surface. They simply take longer to emerge. The reason for this delay lies within the avoidance coping style. Throughout their life, they may have learned to manage emotional discomfort by creating distance. When emotions become intense, they focus elsewhere. When relationships feel overwhelming, they seek space. This strategy helps them feel safe in the short term. The problem is that emotions do not disappear simply because attention moves away from them. They often remain beneath the surface, waiting for a moment when distractions become less effective. During the early stages of no contact, relief can act as a temporary shield. It creates the illusion that everything is fine. Yet, as time passes, reality begins to shift. The absence starts creating space for something neither person expected: reality. While the empath was present, the avoidant rarely had to confront the full impact of losing them. The connection always felt available, even during arguments, even during periods of distance. There was often an unspoken assumption that the empath would remain there. They would reach out again. They would try to reconnect. They would keep the emotional door open. This sense of accessibility changes everything. When someone believes connection is still available, they rarely experience its true absence. No contact removes that certainty. Days pass without communication. Weeks pass without reassurance. The familiar emotional presence disappears. The avoidant can no longer assume that the empath will always return. They can no longer rely on the idea that the relationship remains available whenever they feel ready. For the first time, they must face the possibility that the empath may actually be moving forward. This realization often arrives slowly rather than all at once. It appears in small moments. A memory surfaces unexpectedly. A familiar place triggers a thought. A quiet evening creates space for reflection. The emotional distance that once felt comfortable begins feeling different. This is often where delayed emotions start emerging. Feelings that were previously hidden become harder to ignore. The avoidant may start remembering specific moments from the relationship. Not the arguments, not the pressure, but the connection itself, the support, the loyalty, the conversations that brought comfort during difficult times, the simple presence of someone who genuinely cared. Ironically, many avoidants begin appreciating certain aspects of the relationship only after distance has removed them. What once felt overwhelming now feels meaningful. What once felt restrictive now feels valuable. The absence changes perspective. At the same time, the empath is entering a different stage of their own journey. The emotional chaos that dominated the beginning starts losing intensity. They still think about the relationship, but the thoughts become clearer. Instead of focusing only on what they lost, they begin seeing the relationship as a whole. This shift is important because emotional pain often narrows perspective. During the early days of no contact, the empath may remember only the good moments. They miss the connection so intensely that their mind filters out much of the pain. As time passes, that filter begins weakening. The empath starts remembering the time, waiting, the uncertainty, the confusion, the inconsistency. They remember the nights spent wondering where they stood. They remember the conversations that left them emotionally exhausted. They remember the effort they invested trying to create closeness. They remember how often they ignored their own feelings in order to protect the relationship. These memories do not appear to create bitterness, they appear to create clarity. Distance has a unique way of revealing truth. When someone is deeply attached, emotions can distort reality. The relationship becomes larger than life. The person becomes idealized. Flaws are minimized. Painful experiences are justified. The empath often focuses on potential rather than reality. They hold on to who the avoidant could become instead of fully accepting who they are. No contact slowly dismantles this illusion. The avoidant begins transforming from an emotional symbol back into a real human being. The empath starts seeing both the strengths and weaknesses that were always present. They recognize the moments of genuine connection, but they also acknowledge the moments of disappointment. This balanced perspective is one of the most important stages of healing because it replaces fantasy with truth. As this process continues, the empath often discovers an unexpected source of strength. The same silence that once felt unbearable begins creating emotional freedom. They spend less time checking their phone, less time analyzing every memory, less time searching for hidden meanings. Their focus gradually shifts toward their own life, their own goals, their own growth. The relationship no longer occupies every corner of their mind. Meanwhile, the avoidant continues facing the reality created by absence. The emotional distance that initially felt comfortable becomes harder to maintain because there is nothing left to avoid. The relationship is no longer active. There are no ongoing conflicts, no expectations, no emotional demands. Only memories and reflection remain. And reflection has a way of bringing hidden truths to the surface when enough time passes. Both people are now moving through different emotional landscapes. The empath is gaining clarity. The avoidant is beginning to feel absence. One is learning to let go of illusion. The other is learning that distance does not always erase connection. And as these internal shifts continue unfolding, the emotional dynamic that once defined the relationship begins changing in ways neither person expected. As time continues to pass, many avoidants enter a stage that almost nobody talks about. This is the point where they begin feeling what they previously spent so much energy avoiding. One of the biggest misconceptions about avoidance is the belief that they simply do not care. People often assume that because they withdraw, create distance, or struggle to express emotions, they must not feel deeply. But the reality is often much more complicated. The issue is usually not the absence of emotion. The issue is what happens when emotion becomes too intense. For many avoidants, closeness can activate fears they do not fully understand themselves. The closer someone gets, the more vulnerable they feel. The more vulnerable they feel, the more their defenses activate. As a result, they may pull away not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much and do not know how to manage it. During the relationship, these defenses are often running in the background. The avoidant may focus on problems instead of connection. They may focus on independence instead of intimacy. They may notice flaws more than strengths. Their attention naturally moves toward anything that helps them create emotional distance. This does not always happen consciously. In many cases, it becomes an automatic survival strategy developed over many years. The strange part is that once the relationship pressure disappears, these defenses often become less active. The emotional alarm system that once pushed them away no longer has an immediate threat to react to. There are no expectations waiting for them, no difficult conversations around the corner, no emotional demands. Creating pressure. The relationship is no longer happening in real time. And that is when memories start becoming safer to access. The avoidant who once focused on reasons to pull away may begin focusing on reasons they stayed for as long as they did. They may find themselves remembering specific moments without trying. A conversation appears in their mind while driving. A memory surfaces while lying awake at night. A song suddenly reminds them of a moment they had forgotten. The emotional connection they spend so much time managing starts appearing from a different angle. They remember the comfort. Not dramatic comfort, not perfect comfort, but the simple comfort of knowing someone genuinely cared. They remember the support that was available during difficult moments. They remember having someone who listened, someone who checked in, someone who remained present even during periods when they struggled to remain emotionally available themselves.